Il a été le porte-parole du Pentagone, le porte-parole du State Department. Le dernier poste qu'il a occupé est porte-parole du National Security Council, un poste qu'il a quitté en janvier 2025. Vous l'aurez compris, en termes de communication stratégique, John Kirby a de précieux enseignements à nous livrer. Je vous demande tout de suite de l'accueillir à distance depuis les États-Unis. Merci de l'applaudir.
Good morning everyone. So as you might have noticed, I am not John Kirby. So John Kirby is online with us from Washington, D.C. Good morning, John. Thank you for being with us at these early hours.
Good morning. Good to be with you, Emily. Thank you.
So it's a pleasure to have you, and we're really honored that you accepted to be with us for this second edition of the Paris Defense and Strategy Forum. Can you hear me okay? I just want to check before we go further.
Got you loud and clear.
Loud and clear. So, as I said, we're especially grateful that you accepted to be with us at such an early time in DC. I see it's still dark. So, as mentioned in the introduction, you are and you have been for many years now at the forefront of public affairs and strategic communication, both for the Pentagon and the State Department. And you have been very innovative and forward-looking into how to adapt communication to the digital age and a new frontier in the information space. So some of your ideas and initiatives are now case studies that communicators look into. I know that in this room today, there are many communicators and information professionals, and they are very eager to hear more from you, and definitely not from me. So I'll get started with a few questions, and then hopefully we might have time for a few questions from the floor. So first, can you talk a little bit about the importance of public communication to the policy-making process, and particularly when it comes to national security policy making? How should leaders, in your view, think about that connection?
It's a great question. Thanks, Emily. And again, I apologize I'm not there in person. I would certainly prefer to be, but I do appreciate this opportunity to be with you all. I think it is essential that policymakers today, particularly those in the security landscape, understand the essential role of public communications in the making of policy, but also in the execution of policy, and how vital it is. I think for now 3 decades or so, military leaders in particular have understood the importance of the information environment. This is not a new concept, but the way that the public information landscape has changed in just the last 5-6 years has dramatically altered the manner in which public communication should be considered essential to a policy process rather than something tangential. I'll make this quick, but I believe there are 3 essential myths of public communications and national security policy making today that I think all leaders need to think about as you work through making decisions on behalf of your countries. Number 1, the greatest myth of comms is that you've actually done it. Too many leaders feel that if they deliver a tweet or give a speech or do an interview, issue a statement, that they have communicated. Nothing could be farther from the truth. You've got to constantly iterate yourself in the public information environment. You got to make sure that the audiences are understanding what you're sending, what you're saying, and that they imbibe those messages in a way that is commensurate with your policy, which means you've got to be humble in your communications. You've got to be listening constantly to how audiences are receiving it, and also fully appreciate that we're in a bit of a post-audience world today. Not that audiences aren't important, they're critically important, but that once you put something out into the ethersphere, it's global in a nanosecond, and it has to be easily digestible to the maximum number of audiences at an instant. So you've got to constantly be checking to see whether your messages are being understood the way you want them to be understood. We made some mistakes early on, and as Russia was getting ready to invade Ukraine, we didn't fully understand how some of our messages were being imbibed on the Ukrainian side, and we had to change some of our messaging at the White House and at the Pentagon back in 2022. The second big myth of communications is that you can sideline it. When I first started doing this way back in the 1980s, communications was an annex to the operational plan, something that commanders thought after the fact, after they made their decisions, after they decided their logistics and sustainment maneuvers, after they decided how they were going to operate, then they would fold in how we're going to message. But now it has to be done at the front end. It has to be in the beginning of it, because anymore in conflicts, modern conflicts today, very often success or failure is not determined by kinetics alone, but by, in fact, the narrative, the messaging, the communications aspect, and public support, whether it's domestic public support or foreign public support. So you've got to bake communications in at the beginning, which means your communicators, people like me on your staff, you got to have us in early as you are planning operations, as you are developing budgets, so that the messaging component of what you're doing will be well understood right from the beginning. I saw that in action at the National Security Council. Mr. Sullivan, excuse me, our National Security Advisor, was very good about making sure that I was in the right at the beginning of these discussions. And then the last myth is that facts and evidence are alone important enough in messaging. We believe, particularly those of us that come from a military background, that if the science is behind you, the engineering's behind you, the facts, the evidence, that's all that you need to sway or convince a skeptical audience, and nothing could be farther from the truth. People don't act on thoughts, they don't act on facts, they act on feelings. I'm not suggesting that in our messaging that we be overly emotional, but we've got to find ways to make our policies and our operations more human, more understandable, more relatable to people. And if that means applying to feelings as well as thought, we need to figure out a way to do that, because the worst way you can try to convince a skeptical audience is by just throwing more facts and evidence at them. So again, that's the third biggest myth, I think, of communications, and I think we need to think about all those three as we again develop policies and procedures.
Thank you, John. So something you mentioned in the answer to that question, you mentioned that you altered the way you communicated, so at the Pentagon, about Ukraine back in 2022. So yeah. That refers, I think, to one of the things the US government did over the last few years, and that is to use what you called strategic downgrades, and precisely strategic downgrades of intelligence to make things public, and especially to make public what your adversaries were doing, or sometimes even what your adversaries were thinking of doing. So can you talk a little bit about how that process developed and why you felt it was worth doing and potentially, I would say, worth taking that risk?
An awful lot of credit for this, I think, goes to Mr. Sullivan, again, our National Security Advisor in the last administration, who realized the value of selectively taking intelligence information and making it public to either try to stop an adversary or a foe from doing something or to affect their decision making. So a great example of this was late September of 23. We had intelligence that Serbian forces were preparing to mount an invasion of Kosovo. They were putting forces up against the border. And as anybody there in Europe understands well, that area is still a bit of a tinderbox. And we worked with the intelligence agency to declassify parts of the intelligence picture we had been seeing about what they were putting up on the border, how many troops, how many tanks, sort of what their intentions appeared to be. And then it was given to me to deliver to the White House press corps in one of my on the record gaggles. And within days, we began to see the Serbs back off. once it had been made public what they were doing. So it can have a strategic effect. Mr. Sullivan came up with a list of objectives, about a half a dozen or so, for any downgrade to qualify. And basically, in his view, we couldn't just downgrade intelligence for the sake of doing it. It had to actually achieve an outcome, or at least be driven towards one of our strategic policy objectives. And I could nominate something for downgrade. Other folks on the NSC could. Mr. Sullivan would decide whether it qualified. Then it would go to the intelligence community, and then they would see whether it could or not be downgraded. We obviously didn't want to violate sources and methods and prevent the ability to be able to collect that valuable intelligence. And then they would help us come up with a script that we could make public. We used it to a fairly well against Mr. Putin and Russia throughout the 3 years that we had left in office after he invaded Ukraine. We used it right before he invaded. We knew that he was going to conduct a false flag operation back in February 2022, blame it on the Ukrainians, and that was going to be the justification for his invasion. They were going to set up a car bomb at a Russian official's office building in the Donbass, blame it on the Ukrainians, blame it on terrorism, blame it on Nazism. We got ahead of that, and we made that public. Now, did that stop him? No, he still obviously invaded, but it slowed him down. We know it got inside his decision-making loop that we were able to make that public. We used it also in other ways to make public what the North Koreans were doing to support Russia, to make public what the Iranians were doing to support Russia. When then Speaker Pelosi decided to visit Taiwan, we had intelligence about how the PRC was going to react. All the missiles they were going to fly, the exercises they were going to conduct, the kinds of activities they were going to participate in as an act of protest of her visit to Taiwan. We made that public as well. Now, the Chinese still did all those things, but because we got ahead of them, we were able to take the oxygen out of their balloon. We were able to take the temperature down from what they were trying to do, the shock effect that they were trying to have. So it's a powerful tool. It can be overdone, and we obviously tried very hard not to overdo it. You can't do it in every particular case and with every specific piece of intel. But it can absolutely help shape the information environment, get ahead of or disrupt the thinking and the decision-making of your adversary. And I hope it's a lesson that we never, ever unlearn. I've been obviously doing this a long, long time. I've never seen the relationship between communicators like me and the intelligence community as strong and as vibrant as it was over the last several years. The intelligence community really worked hard to work with us on the communication side to see what we could do to make public as much information as possible.
Thank you, John. So what's interesting here is to hear that this allowed you to shape, disrupt, but not stop the flow of disinformation or the malign information operations. So thank you for being so candid about the risk-benefit balance. So speaking about risk, I'm going to move on to one of my favorite questions. It's quite simple. So as you look into the future of this very rapidly changing information environment, and particularly in the national security space, what trends or developments worry you the most? And my favorite way of putting it is, what keeps you from sleeping at night?
I think there are two things that worry me the most. And one of them I wish I had a good answer for, but I don't, and that's artificial intelligence. So much about the war in Ukraine is a first. It's the first drone war, the first commercial space war, and it's in many ways the first AI war. The Russians in particular have been very active in that space in using artificial intelligence to shape the information environment in ways that suit their strategic interests. The Ukrainians have been incredibly creative and innovative in the information space themselves, but I don't know that we have all gotten our arms around the impact of artificial intelligence and what it can do to the information environment going forward, because I think we're just at the tip of the iceberg right now. We worked very hard in the Biden administration with public and private companies to try to get our arms around a set of protocols and procedures on an artificial intelligence to make it more credible, to make it more transparent, and to try to reap the values of artificial intelligence while minimizing the perils of it. The perils, of course, being one of them being that it could be brutally effective in terms of disinformation. But there's an awful lot more work that needs to be done, and it comes at a time. This focus on AI and the worries about it. It comes at a time when trust in public institutions continues to drop, and that's very worrisome because people are more and more confused about what they will believe in, what they can believe in, outlets that they'll follow or outlets that they won't follow. And so there's not a lot of trust out there in the information environment, and artificial intelligence is going to do nothing to improve that unless we as policymakers really get together and try to come up with, again, a common set of rules and protocols and procedures that can be relied upon and can be transparent and credible to the maximum number of audiences as possible. The other thing that worries me about this, and it kind of is tied in with artificial intelligence, is media literacy. There are some countries in Europe that do this very well. I think we've got a long way to go here in the United States on this, on media literacy. It can't just be something that we think about for our young kids. I mean, although that's got to be a part of it, media literacy has got to be a lifelong endeavor, and we've got to spend more time and energy, I believe, in making sure that that audiences here in the United States, all around the world, know how to digest news and information in a healthy way. I like to think of news consumption the way I think about a nutritional diet. You know, you got to work at it. It's got to be something you go and make happen. But unfortunately, because technology is as advanced as it is today, it becomes too easy for news and information to just come at you through an algorithm. And people are very comfortable with algorithms. I read some recent polling just last week, which was stunning to me, excuse me, about how comfortable people are just letting the algorithms on their phone decide what is or what isn't news for them, and just bring it right to them, rather than putting the effort in to go find credible news and information on outlets you might not otherwise seek. We've got to do a better job making sure people understand how to get the most accurate, the most balanced, the most credible news and information out there to improve, I think, not only the vibrancy of the information environment, but the credibility of the information that people are getting from it and from policymakers in general. So I'm very worried about this nexus of a decline in trust and confidence and media literacy, sound media literacy practices, and the rise of artificial intelligence and how that might complicate that very, very messy situation.
Okay, thank you, John.